The violent ringing of the church bell split the air, summoning the citizens of Copper Creek to witness what they called justice, though it was nothing more than hatred dressed in righteousness. Rose Palmer stumbled forward, her bound hands unable to break her fall as she collapsed onto the dusty Main Street. The year was 1878, and in this unforgiving corner of the Arizona Territory, a woman accused had few allies. "Get up, thief." A boot connected with her ribs, sending fresh waves of pain through her already battered body. Rose had been in Copper Creek for less than 2 weeks, arriving on the stagecoach with hopes of a fresh start after her father's passing left her with nothing but debts in St. Louis. She'd secured a position as a seamstress at Mrs. Whittaker's dress shop, only to be accused of stealing a valuable ruby brooch that belonged to the mayor's wife. The brooch had been found in her rented room, planted there by someone who wanted the newcomer gone. "I didn't take it," she whispered through split lips, her voice lost beneath the angry shouts of the gathering crowd. Mayor Hargrove stood on the steps of the town hall, his considerable girth stretching his expensive waistcoat. "This woman has violated our trust. She has taken advantage of our hospitality." His booming voice carried across the street. "And we all know what happens to thieves in Copper Creek." The crowd roared its approval. Another kick landed on Rose's shoulder, flipping her onto her back. Her once pretty blue dress was torn and stained with dirt and blood. Her auburn hair had come loose from its pins and hung in tangled waves around her bruised face. "Stop this madness." A deep voice cut through the din. The crowd parted, revealing a tall figure striding purposefully toward them. His spurs jingled with each determined step, and the sun glinted off the badge pinned to his leather vest. Sheriff Samuel Dawson had been out of town tracking rustlers for the past 3 days, returning just in time to witness his town descending into mob rule. "What in God's name are you people doing?" he demanded, his hand resting casually on the holstered Colt at his hip. Though he appeared relaxed, there was a dangerous edge to his voice that made several men step back. "Administering justice, Sheriff," Mayor Hargrove replied, his jowls quivering with indignation. "This woman stole Mrs. Hargrove's ruby brooch." Sheriff Dawson knelt beside Rose, gently brushing the hair from her face. Her right eye was swollen shut and blood trickled from her nose. "Miss, can you hear me?" Rose's good eye flickered open, focusing with difficulty on the man above her. "I didn't steal anything," she managed. "I know," he said quietly for her ears alone. Then he stood, turning to face the crowd. "This stops now. We have laws in this town, and mob justice isn't one of them." "The brooch was found in her room," someone shouted. "And did anyone see her take it?" the sheriff challenged. "Did anyone see her wearing it or trying to sell it?" His gaze swept over the crowd, many of whom suddenly found the ground very interesting. "I thought not." With deliberate movements, he cut the ropes binding Rose's wrists. Then, with unexpected gentleness, he slid one arm under her knees and the other around her shoulders, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. Rose couldn't help the small cry of pain that escaped her lips. "I'm sorry," he murmured, adjusting his hold to minimize her discomfort. Mayor Hargrove stepped forward, his face mottled with anger. "You're overstepping your authority, Dawson. The town council doesn't have the authority to beat an innocent woman half to death," Dawson interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of steel. "Anyone who laid a hand on her will answer to me, and that includes you, Mayor." A murmur ran through the crowd. The sheriff held Rose securely against his chest, her head resting on his shoulder. She was barely conscious, her breathing shallow and pained. "Now, I'm taking this woman to Doc Miller's. Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to try stopping me." His eyes, hard as flint, scanned the crowd. But I promise you'll regret it." No one moved to block his path as he began walking toward the doctor's office at the end of the street. Rose felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her cheek, a stark contrast to the chaos they were leaving behind. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Because it's my job to protect the innocent," he replied. "And because I know you're innocent, Miss Palmer." "How?" she managed, fighting to stay conscious. A small, grim smile touched his lips. "Because the real thief is the mayor's own nephew, Peter Hargrove. Been suspecting him of several thefts around town, but haven't been able to prove it yet. He's been working at the dress shop too, sweeping floors, running errands. Had access to your room. You were just a convenient scapegoat." Rose wanted to ask more, but darkness was creeping in at the edges of her vision. The last thing she remembered was the sheriff kicking open the doctor's door and calling urgently for help. When Rose awoke, sunlight was streaming through a window she didn't recognize. She was lying in a clean bed, wearing a nightgown that wasn't hers. Every inch of her body ached, but the sharp, stabbing pains had dulled somewhat. "Ah, you're awake." An elderly man with kind eyes and a well-trimmed white beard approached the bed. "I'm Dr. Miller. You've been unconscious for nearly 2 days, Miss Palmer. 2 days." Her voice was a raspy whisper. The doctor helped her take a few sips of water. "You had a concussion, 3 broken ribs, and enough bruises to make a spotted leopard jealous. It's a miracle nothing vital was damaged." The door opened, and Sheriff Dawson entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. His brown hair was slightly disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept much. "Miss Palmer," he said, a genuine smile of relief softening his weathered features. "It's good to see you awake." "Sheriff," she acknowledged, self-consciously touching her bruised face. "I suppose I have you to thank for saving my life." "Any decent man would have done the same," he replied, though they all knew that wasn't true. Decent men had stood in that crowd, watching her being beaten. "What happens now?" she asked, fear creeping back into her voice. "The town believes I'm a thief." "Not anymore," Dawson said, pulling a chair beside her bed. "Peter Hargrove confessed. Seems he couldn't handle the guilt after seeing what happened to you. He'd been stealing small items for months, trinkets, jewelry, money, anything he could pawn in the next town over to pay gambling debts." "And the mayor?" she asked. "Embarrassed and apologetic," Dawson replied, though his tone suggested the mayor's contrition was more about saving face than genuine remorse. "He's offered to pay for your medical expenses and provide compensation for your mistreatment." Rose turned her face away, tears welling in her good eye. "I don't want his money. I just want to leave this place as soon as I'm able." The sheriff and doctor exchanged a glance. "Miss Palmer," Dr. Miller said gently, "you're not going anywhere for at least a few weeks. Those ribs need time to heal, and you shouldn't travel until that concussion is fully resolved." "I can't stay here," she insisted, panic rising in her voice. "These people tried to kill me." Sheriff Dawson leaned forward, his expression serious. "Miss Palmer, Rose, you have my word that nothing like this will ever happen again. Not in my town. Those responsible will face charges, and I'll personally ensure your safety while you recover." Something in his steady gaze made her believe him, or perhaps she was simply too exhausted to argue. "Very well," she conceded. "But once I'm healed, I'm leaving Copper Creek and never looking back." The sheriff nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's your right. In the meantime, you'll stay here with Doc Miller and his wife. I've arranged it all." Over the next 2 weeks, Rose slowly began to heal. The bruises faded from angry purple to sickly yellow, and she could take deeper breaths without feeling like she was being stabbed. Mrs. Miller was a kind, motherly woman who helped her bathe and change dressings, telling amusing stories about the town's history, to distract Rose from her pain and fears. Sheriff Dawson visited daily, sometimes bringing wildflowers he'd picked on his rounds or books borrowed from the schoolteacher. He was unfailingly polite, never staying too long or causing her discomfort, but Rose found herself looking forward to his visits more than she cared to admit. One evening, as twilight painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson, he arrived with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked, carefully untying the string. "Something I thought you might like," he replied, watching as she unwrapped a beautiful leather-bound journal and a pen with a delicate silver nib. "Sheriff Dawson," she began, genuinely touched by the thoughtful gift. "Samuel," he corrected with a smile, "or Sam if you prefer." "I think we're past formalities, don't you?" she smiled back, surprising herself. It was the first real smile since the attack. "Samuel, then, and you should call me Rose." "Rose," he repeated, as if testing how the name felt on his tongue. "It suits you." A comfortable silence settled between them as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the window. "You mentioned wanting to leave Copper Creek," he said finally. "Where will you go?" Rose traced the embossed pattern on the journal cover with her fingertip. "I don't know. I came west because there was nothing left for me in St. Louis after my father died. I thought I could make a new start here, but—" She trailed off, the memory of the mob's hatred still too raw. "Not all of Copper Creek was in that crowd," Samuel said quietly. "There are good people here who are ashamed of what happened to you. Mrs. Whitaker has been asking about you every day. She wants you to know your job is still waiting if you want it." Rose looked up, surprised. "After everything that happened," he nodded. "People make mistakes, Rose. Terrible ones sometimes, but some are trying to make amends." She considered this, trying to imagine returning to normal life in a town where she'd been publicly humiliated and beaten. "I don't know if I can forgive them," she admitted. "No one's asking you to," he replied. "Just don't judge the whole town by its worst day." By the end of the third week, Rose was strong enough to take short walks with Mrs. Miller in the doctor's garden. The fresh air and gentle exercise helped her spirits as much as her body, and she began to feel more like herself again. It was during one of these walks that she first noticed the change in the townspeople's attitudes. Mrs. Abernathy, the baker's wife, stopped by with a basket of fresh bread and tearful apologies. The next day, it was Mrs. Whitaker with fabric for a new dress and assurances that Rose's position was secure whenever she felt ready to return. Even Mayor Hargrove's wife came, bearing a different brooch, this one with a sapphire that matched Rose's eyes as a gift and a plea for forgiveness. Rose accepted the gift with as much grace as she could muster, though she doubted she would ever wear it. Through it all, Samuel was a constant presence, a steady rock in the turbulent aftermath of her ordeal. He never pushed her to accept the town's apologies or to make decisions about her future. He simply offered his support, his company, and, increasingly, his friendship. One evening, nearly a month after the attack, he arrived at the doctor's house looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I was wondering if you might like to go for a drive tomorrow," he said, his hat in his hands. "Doc says you're strong enough for short outings now, and I thought you might enjoy seeing a bit of the countryside. There's a spot by the creek that's real pretty this time of year." Rose felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her healing ribs. "I'd like that very much, Samuel." The next day dawned clear and perfect, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. Samuel arrived promptly at 10, driving a smart buggy pulled by a handsome bay horse. He traded his usual work clothes for a clean shirt and his good Sunday coat, and Rose found herself admiring the way the sunlight brought out the golden highlights in his brown hair. For her part, Rose had done her best with her limited wardrobe. Mrs. Miller had helped her wash and style her hair, which now fell in soft waves down her back, held partially back by a simple ribbon. Samuel helped her into the buggy with gentle hands, careful of her still tender ribs. His fingers lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary, and Rose felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. They drove through town, drawing curious glances from the citizens of Copper Creek. Rose held her head high, refusing to show any sign of the anxiety bubbling beneath her composed exterior. Samuel seemed to sense her discomfort and kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks and sharing amusing anecdotes from his 5 years as sheriff. Once they left the town behind, Rose felt herself truly relaxing for the first time. The landscape opened up around them, vast stretches of desert, punctuated by rugged mesas and distant mountains, all under a sky so intensely blue it almost hurt to look at it. "It's beautiful," she breathed, taking in the wild grandeur of the territory. "It grows on you," Samuel agreed, glancing at her with a smile. "When I first came out west after the war, I thought it was the most desolate place I'd ever seen. Took me a while to appreciate its particular kind of beauty." "You fought in the war?" Rose asked, realizing how little she actually knew about him. He nodded, his expression growing more somber. "Union cavalry. Joined up in '63, right after I turned 18. Saw things no boy that age should see." He was silent for a moment, lost in memories. "Came west afterward like a lot of fellows, needed open spaces and new beginnings." "And became a sheriff," she prompted, wanting to know more. Samuel chuckled. "Not right away. Did some cowboying first, then scouting for the army. Ended up in Copper Creek by accident. Horse went lame, and I needed work while it healed. The previous sheriff was retiring, and the town council was desperate for someone who could handle a gun and wasn't afraid of the local troublemakers." He shrugged. 5 years later, I'm still here." "Do you ever think of moving on?" Rose asked, curious about what kept him in this small desert town. He considered the question carefully before answering. "Used to, early on. Figured I'd save up some money, then head to California maybe. But somewhere along the way, this place became home." "These people," he paused, casting her an apologetic glance. "These people became your responsibility," Rose finished for him, understanding. "Yes," he said, grateful for her perception. "Not always easy, but it matters. Doing what's right matters." They arrived at the creek, a surprisingly lush oasis amid the arid landscape. Cottonwood trees provided dappled shade, and the water burbled pleasantly over smooth stones. Samuel helped Rose from the buggy and spread a blanket beneath the largest tree, setting out the picnic Mrs. Miller had packed for them. "This is lovely," Rose said, carefully lowering herself onto the blanket. Her ribs still protested certain movements, but the pain was manageable now. They ate fried chicken and fresh bread, followed by Mrs. Miller's famous apple pie. The conversation flowed easily between them, covering books they'd both read, places they'd traveled, and dreams they still harbored. "What about you?" Samuel asked as they lingered over the last of the lemonade. "What were you hoping to find when you came west?" Rose considered the question, watching a butterfly drift lazily among the wildflowers growing along the creek bank. "Independence, I suppose. After my father died, I realized how sheltered my life had been. I wanted to prove to myself more than anyone that I could make my own way in the world." "And can you?" he asked, his eyes serious but kind. "I thought I could," she replied honestly. "Now I'm not so sure. The world seems a harsher place than I imagined." "It can be," he agreed. "But there's goodness too, if you know where to look for it." His hand found hers on the blanket, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Don't let what happened make you lose sight of that." Rose looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face so open and earnest in the dappled sunlight. Something shifted in her heart, a gentle unfurling of feelings she hadn't expected to develop. "Samuel," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. "You don't have to decide anything now," he said, seeming to read her thoughts. "About staying or going. Just know that if you do stay, you won't be alone." The weeks that followed were a time of healing not just for Rose's body, but for her spirit as well. She gradually resumed her work at Mrs. Whittaker's shop, finding unexpected solace in the familiar rhythm of measuring, cutting, and stitching. The townspeople were respectful, sometimes overly so, as if afraid a wrong word might shatter the fragile peace. Samuel continued his daily visits, now often accompanying her on evening walks as the summer heat gave way to the more temperate days of early autumn. They developed a comfortable routine, sharing the events of their days and gradually learning the intimate details that form the foundation of deeper relationships. Rose learned that Samuel liked his coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, that he had a surprisingly beautiful singing voice though he rarely used it, and that he sent half his salary to his widowed mother in Pennsylvania. He discovered her passion for poetry, her secret ambition to one day design her own line of fashionable yet practical women's clothing, and her inability to pass a stray animal without offering it food. By October, Rose had moved from the doctor's house to a small but charming cottage on the edge of town, using part of the compensation money the mayor had insisted she accept. Samuel helped her settle in, building shelves for her growing collection of books and making sure the cottage was secure. "What do you think?" she asked one evening as they sat on her small porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in vivid hues of orange and purple. "About the cottage," he replied, sipping the lemonade she'd prepared. "About me staying in Copper Creek," she clarified, turning to gauge his reaction. Samuel set down his glass, his expression carefully neutral though she could see hope flickering in his eyes. "I think it would make a lot of people very happy," he said diplomatically. Rose smiled, appreciating his restraint. "And would you be among those people, Sheriff Dawson?" "I believe I would be at the head of that particular line, Miss Palmer," he replied, a slow smile spreading across his face. Their first kiss came that night, gentle and tender beneath the vast canopy of stars. Rose felt something unlock inside her, a door she had closed after the attack, convinced that her future in Copper Creek had been irreparably damaged. In Samuel's arms, with his lips moving softly against hers, she found not just forgiveness for the town that had wronged her, but hope for what her life there could still become. Winter came to the Arizona territory, bringing cooler temperatures but little snow to the desert town. Christmas approached, and Rose found herself busier than ever at the dress shop, creating holiday finery for the town's annual Christmas Eve dance. "You should make something special for yourself," Mrs. Whittaker suggested one afternoon as they worked side by side on a midnight blue gown for the banker's wife. "Sheriff Dawson would surely appreciate seeing you in something fine for the dance." Rose blushed, still not entirely comfortable with how quickly the town had embraced her courtship with Samuel. "We haven't discussed attending," she hedged, though the idea had crossed her mind. Mrs. Whittaker raised a knowing eyebrow. "Well, if I were betting, I'd say he'll be asking you any day now. That man looks at you like you hung the moon and stars." Rose Palmer. That evening, as if Mrs. Whittaker had somehow orchestrated it, Samuel arrived at Rose's cottage with an unusually formal manner. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His boots were polished to a high shine, and he wore a new shirt she hadn't seen before. "Rose," he began after they'd settled in her small sitting room, "I was hoping you might do me the honor of accompanying me to the Christmas Eve dance." She smiled, charmed by his formality. "I would be delighted, Samuel." He visibly relaxed, then reached into his pocket. "I have something for you. An early Christmas gift, you might say." The small box he handed her contained a delicate silver necklace with a pendant shaped like a rose, a tiny ruby at its center. "Samuel, it's beautiful," she breathed, running her finger over the intricate metalwork. "It reminded me of you," he said simply. "Beautiful and strong with a heart of fire." Rose felt tears prick her eyes at the sentiment. "Will you help me put it on?" He moved behind her, his fingers brushing the sensitive skin of her neck as he fastened the clasp. The moment felt significant somehow, weighted with unspoken promises. When he returned to face her, his expression had grown serious. "Rose, there's something else I want to ask you." Her heart quickened as he took her hands in his. "Yes. These past months have been the happiest of my life," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I never expected to find someone like you, especially not under such circumstances. But from the moment I carried you away from that mob, something in me knew you were special." Rose squeezed his hands encouragingly, too moved to speak. "I know it might seem soon," he continued, "and if you need more time, I understand. But I also know what I feel, and I don't want to waste another day not telling you." He took a deep breath. "Rose Palmer, I love you, and if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. In answer, Samuel slid from the sofa to one knee before her, producing a simple but elegant gold ring with a small diamond that caught the lamplight. "Rose, will you marry me?" Joy bubbled up inside her, sweeping away the last shadows of the pain and fear that had marked her introduction to Copper Creek. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, Samuel Dawson, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into a kiss that promised a lifetime of protection, respect, and love. The Christmas Eve dance became their engagement celebration, with the entire town turning out to congratulate them. Even Mayor Hargrove, still somewhat chastened by his role in Rose's ordeal, offered sincere good wishes and an open invitation to hold the wedding in the town hall at no cost. As Samuel led Rose onto the dance floor for their first waltz as an engaged couple, whispers of approval followed them. They made a striking pair, the tall, handsome sheriff and the auburn-haired beauty who had overcome tragedy to find love in the most unexpected place. "Are you happy?" Samuel murmured as they moved gracefully among the other dancers. Rose looked up at him, her heart full to bursting. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied truthfully. "If someone had told me 6 months ago that I would find love in the same town where I was nearly killed, I would have thought them mad." "Life has a way of surprising us," he said, pulling her a little closer than was strictly proper for a public dance. "I'm just grateful it brought you to Copper Creek, despite everything." "As am I," she said, resting her head briefly against his chest, feeling his steady heartbeat beneath her cheek, the same heartbeat that had comforted her that terrible day when he carried her broken body through the streets. They were married in the spring, when the desert bloomed with unexpected wildflowers, and the air was sweet with the scent of new beginnings. Rose wore a gown of her own design, and Samuel wore the first suit he'd owned since his army days. The entire town attended, the past forgiven if not forgotten, as Copper Creek celebrated the union of their sheriff, and the woman who had taught them all about courage, forgiveness, and the healing power of love. Years later, when their 3 children asked how they met, Samuel and Rose would exchange a look, silently agreeing on the simplified version appropriate for young ears. "Your father rescued me when I was in trouble," Rose would say, and taught me that sometimes you find love in the last place you're looking for it. But in the privacy of their bedroom, with the desert stars shining through the window, they would sometimes speak of that day, the day when a broken woman was lifted by a good man who stood alone against hatred and chose justice over popularity. In those quiet moments, they would marvel at how something so beautiful had grown from soil soaked with tears and blood, proving that even in the wild and unforgiving West, love could take root and flourish against all odds.